Welcome to the Right to Reason, episode 32. I'm your host, Robert Stanley. Today's broadcast is super cool. We've got Anthony Magnabosco back to kick some epistemological booty for us. Let me ask you a question. How do you change someone's mind? Have you ever tried? It's very difficult and very important. Anthony is going to teach us how to do just that. Let's get reasoning, people.
And let me assure you that we are going to take our fight for economic justice, for social justice, for environmental sanity, for a world of peace.
And I think it should be religion treated with ridicule and hatred and contempt. And I claim that right.
One aspect of American U.S. life and culture that I think that does deserve respect and admiration is protection of freedom of speech. The U.S. is unique in the world in that respect.
The cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself.
Quoting the Bible is not going to get you anywhere because you haven't demonstrated why anybody should consider the Bible to be true or authoritative.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
So last time Anthony was on the show, he introduced us to Street Epistemology, which is a way to talk to people in a kind of Socratic style and get them to look at their own beliefs from a different perspective. He's chiseled this method down to a fine art. But today, we're going to play clips from him on the street and see how it's done live. This is very cool. I can't wait to hear how he does it. With each audio clip, Anthony's going to explain all the ins and outs therewith so we can understand how to use his method in our own lives. Imagine that, having the power to change people's minds. Before that, I thought we should do a throwback to an episode with Daryl Ray where he talks about sex, shame, and parasites. My audio qualities have improved somewhat since those olden days, so you might find the recording a little scratchy, but what he has to say is really awesome. Let's start the show.
Culture is not your friend. Culture is for other people's convenience and the convenience of various institutions, churches, companies.
We very naturally, as a cognitive and behavioral imperative, we form descriptions of the world and we try to figure out what's going on.
Who based the design of rockets on science? They reach the moon. It works. Bitches.
Can you kind of explain that for us a little?
Yeah. I think they're a continuum. I think they overlap. Guilt and shame do, but I think they are different, and that's a significant difference. Guilt is behavior based and individual based. I can be guilty of shoplifting something, and then I would go home and feel guilty about it. But nobody on the planet knows I shoplifted something. That's very individual, and I was taught that from very early on. I was taught that there's certain behaviors that are wrong, and you should feel guilty for that. That's okay. Now, some of the time that's good. Most of the time, guilt is not, because I masturbated this morning. I feel guilty about it. Nobody on the planet knows I masturbated this morning, and yet I still feel guilty about it. Well, that's a bad form of guilt, but that's individual, and nobody knows about it. However, on the other end of the spectrum is shame. And shame is not individual. It is community-based. For example, if somebody found out that I masturbated this morning, I would feel shame. Oh, God dang, he knows I masturbated this morning, or she knows I masturbated this morning. That overwhelming feeling, that flush that people get, that's shame. It's very different than the guilt side, piece of it. And I see with religions emphasize different components. Some religions emphasize the guilt. Some religions emphasize the shame. All religions have both in them. I'm not saying that. I'm saying they emphasize different. Islam is a shame-based religion. Mormonism is a shame-based religion, because so much of the behavior is focused on communal sanctions. So if a girl in Islam has sex outside of marriage, then she has shamed her entire community, especially her immediate family. And then the family takes on the shame. It's like the shame can propagate on and get onto other people like dirt. And then the family is obligated to cleanse the family of this shame. And if they don't, then the whole family can be sanctioned by the community. That is shame.
Like you've embarrassed our family. You've embarrassed me as the man of the family.
And so in those cultures, a girl could be stoned to death. A girl could be sold into slavery. I mean, there's all sorts of bad things that can happen because of the shame. We don't experience that kind of communal shame in North America mostly, unless you're Mormon. Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses practice communal shame. And when you hear about just fellowship and that sort of stuff that the Jehovah's Witnesses do and excommunication that the Mormons do, they pretty much kick you out, and you are persona non grata from then on in that culture. And it's because of the shame component. You have shamed us. Once you have shamed your family, then the family has to get rid of you. I mean, at Jehovah's Witnesses, they're very clear about if you have shamed the family and not followed the guidelines of Jehovah's Witnesses, once you're out, if my kid is kicked out or my parent is kicked out, I cannot talk to them. Once you're disfellowshipped from Jehovah's Witnesses, you may not have contact with that person.
They can't call them on the phone. I mean, it's not just a church excommunication.
You do not call them on the phone. They do everything they can to cut you off from that person that's been disfellowshipped. That doesn't mean people don't violate that once in a while. But I've just had to deal with so many Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons that once they're out of the family, they can't call and say happy birthday, Mom. And Dad certainly didn't call and say happy birthday or, hope you're coming back for Christmas or anything. They don't want, you are gone. You don't, what do they call it? You're not my son anymore. You're not my father anymore. You're
like a cult.
Well, that's what Mormons are. They're a cult. And so is Jehovah's Witnesses. Seventh-day Adventists. We should call these things what they are. They are cults.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, some what we would call major religions can be quite cult-like. I mean, the Catholics can be quite cult-like in some areas. But Catholics can go back both ways. But you look at the way Catholicism works in some places, it looks a lot like Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses. People that leave the Catholic Church are, in disfellowship, so to speak. They're not talked to anymore. They're a disgrace to the family.
I know. I grew up in a Christian school, and it was Baptist, and the level of shame that you're referring to with the Mormons, I didn't experience that, but I do remember the public shaming that they did. There was this girl, beautiful girl. She was the captain of the cheerleaders or whatever. Do they have cheerleader captains?
Yeah.
She's head of the cheerleaders, whatever. And one of our chapel services, and if people didn't go to Christian school chapels, it's like one of your classes, and you go to sit down in church for an hour, and then you go back to biology or math or what have you.
Right.
And we all sit in there. It's the entire school, and they bring her right up to the front, and she had to confess that she had had sex.
Oh. Wow.
And she had to confess of her partner, and she's just weeping in front of all of her peers and friends, teachers. I mean, the school counselor, and I'm using my air quotes on that. It was just the preacher. But whoever she's going to talk to about this, they're there too. She has no one. I mean, I can't believe that this kind of thing doesn't lead to some suicide issues with teenagers.
Absolutely can. That is abusive.
And they bring up the guy after that, and he doesn't comment to the sex. It was almost like it was a double standard there. It was just kind of like, it was understood like, yeah, you got with a lascivious girl. It was a totally different attitude. He confessed to, he had smoked a cigarette and had a beer that night at a party. And I remember sitting there, freshman in high school, listening to these people talking. And I was masturbating. I was thinking dirty thoughts about the very girl that was up there while she was talking. But the whole time, I'm thinking, oh, these are really horrible people. I'm not going to look up to them anymore. With all that judgment in my heart that I had been trained and conditioned to feel.
Right. Well, that's a great example of shame, and it shows the communal component of it. You don't really have shame without the community. Shame is guilt is I did something bad. Shame is I am bad. It changes. It goes to the core of your identity. That's what shame does, and you get your identity from the community. Communities help you create your identity. So when the community shames you, you are a bad person. It's not that you did something bad. Guilt, I did something bad. Shame is I am a bad person. And that's what that community was trying to do to that poor girl.
It's sad.
That's horrible. That's absolutely
For the record, I don't want to mislead the audience. I wasn't masturbating at the time of her confession. It wasn't like waiting for details on that, to get more fantasy. But anyway, I to this day that still bothers me and it wasn't just her. That was a standard practice. That one just kind of stayed in my head because those were two people that I had looked up to.
Imagine what it did to her, and then imagine more importantly, not more importantly, but almost as importantly, what it did to all the other girls in that. And you're right. It's definitely a double standard. Christianity is a gigantic double standard between male and female sexuality.
So
our entire culture has a double standard on that, and it comes from our religious ideas.
Clearly a form of control, but the thing I don't understand about the psychology behind religion and shame, evangelism, all these different pies that religion gets its fingers in. This doesn't seem to be the intention of the Christian leadership. It's almost as if, how is it that they are unaware of this, to use your metaphor, virus, in the same way that even maybe in the analogy I used, the students didn't know. I didn't know sitting there that judging them that I was being controlled. Right. And the preacher doesn't really know that he's having an effective role playing this control. And how does this thing happen without the intention of the people involved? At least not them being aware of the intention, perhaps.
Right. Well, that's exactly the subject of my book, The God Virus. There's a new book out. It came out. It has nothing to do with religion, but it's called "This Is Your Brain on Parasites." It's a real interesting read. But what I try to do is the same thing as this book talks about. That we have parasites. We have organic parasites like Toxoplasma gondii gets in your head. It's a parasite that gets into cats' brains, into cats' guts, and gets into rats' brains. And when this parasite gets in the rat brain, the rat changes its behavior. It changes behavior in a very radical way, but a very simple way. The rat is scared to death of owls and predators, but when it gets this parasite, the Toxoplasma gondii, in its head, then the rat loses its fear of cats. In fact, goes around and prefers the smell of cat urine or cat pheromones. In other words, the rat's going around seeking cats. Now, why would it do that? Because it wants to be the parasite needs the cat gut to reproduce in. So the cat then eats the rat. The parasite reproduces in the cat's feces or in its gut, and then in the feces of the cat, rats walk through it or walk around it, and they get the parasite. So it's a cycle, a parasitic cycle. So there are lots of parasites out there that have a direct impact on our behavior. Parasites control us. And you and your listeners may not realize it, but you have been controlled by parasites or by viruses or by other organisms at some point in your life. If you've ever had a cold and you sneezed, that cold virus was controlling your nervous system to make you sneeze, because that's the way the virus gets from my nose to your nose. So we have this notion that we control ourselves, but no, we don't. Lots of things can have impacts on us, and we now know that there's lots of intestinal parasites that have direct behavioral consequences on us, on our pets, and other places. So I use that metaphor of a parasite to show that when you have parasitic memes or parasitic ideas like religion, that parasite gets in your brain. Well, the parasite, you don't know that you are infected with Toxoplasma gondii. I mean, I'm looking at you right now, Robert, and you could be infected with Toxoplasma gondii, and I would never know it, and you wouldn't either. And yet your behavior is being influenced by that organism. In fact, there's some evidence that when humans get it in their brains, it causes behavioral problems. It makes them more, for example, makes men more neurotic and women more risk-taking. I mean, seems to be some real psychological consequences to having this parasite once it gets into your brain. Now, it doesn't always get into your brain. I mean, that's its goal in a rat. It doesn't want to get in a human brain. That's quote want. I'm using that metaphorically. But that's its program. Get in the brain of whatever organism I'm in. It doesn't propagate inside of us very well, and so it doesn't. But it is still potentially dangerous to us. That's why women are told to stay away from cat litter when they're pregnant, because it can really screw up the fetus. It can really screw up stuff in pregnancy. So if you understand what's going on, I told you early on that we at 3, 4, 5 we're being infected with these notions of religion, and they're very deep. Well, that's getting infected with a parasitic notion, a parasitic idea. Whether it's if you're being raised Catholic, then you're being raised with the parasitic meme or parasitic idea of Catholicism. And they have different behavioral impacts on you than if you're getting infected with a Baptist or a Muslim or a Mormon. Each one of those parasites impacts your behavior different, but you are equally unaware of it. The Mormon in Utah that has no exposure to anybody else has no idea is being controlled by a Mormon parasite. They have no clue.
Love me some Dr. Ray. I wish I could put a spoonful of him in my coffee and drink it every morning. You know what I mean? You can find him and a lot of other guest clips on the Right to Reason YouTube channel. Hey, speaking of Patreon, were we talking about Patreon? Well, we are now. It's happening. So just let it happen. Don't make it weird, people. If you want to support the show, take your ass on over to patreon.com/right. Only $1 makes a big difference and helps me get this message out to more people. So if you think this broadcast has value, go to patreon.com/right and help a brother out. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm just asking for a hand. All right, it's time to take this message to the streets with the street epistemologist Anthony Magna Bosco, straight out of Compton. His palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy. And that's just the way it is, people. The street epistemologist, up next. Anthony, happy to have you here, sir.
It is so good to be back. Thanks, Robert.
Yeah. All right. So just in case, speaking of him being back, if anyone isn't familiar with the last episode that he was on or isn't already familiar with his work, I'm going to give you a quick idea of what street epistemology is. From his website, it says, Street epistemology is a dialectical approach intent on helping people reflect on the reliability of the methods used to arrive at deeply held beliefs. Street epistemology is the application of epistemology, which is the study of knowledge, my listeners know that word, outside of formal academic context. It is a method of an approach for having meaningful, civil, non-confrontational, respectful, and productive conversations that are oriented toward aligning our beliefs with reality. Anthony, yeah.
It really is.
So, Anthony, I was hoping to go over a couple audio clips from your YouTube channel today, but before that, I understand you're doing like workshops and classes on this sort of thing now?
Yes, we are. I think we've done about 5 classes and workshops, we're calling them, where we give a quick little introduction as far as what street epistemology is. I show an example, and then we spend the rest of the session doing role play, where one person will pretend to be the individual with a claim. The other person will be the street epistemologist. We role play for 5 minutes, and then we switch roles. And we've done this in Atlanta at DragonCon. I did it at the a skeptics group in Denver. And then most recently, it's going on about a month now, I was in Manchester, England at QEDCon, and we had people lined up trying to get into this workshop, and we had to turn people away because when we're doing the role play, it gets so noisy that we had to cap the number for the second session. So there's a genuine interest in this, And it was really exciting to see a room full of people practicing this method.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
So do they, whenever they do the role play part, is it like cards that the people have to read through or something, and then you have to respond to whatever's on the card kind of thing? Or
what we decided to do, we've been fine-tuning this ever since we started. So initially we gave people a scenario to role play, but then we realized that people have their own beliefs that they can role play, or they have a spouse who they're intending to have a conversation with, so they can pretend to be their spouse with this belief, or they have a friend, or this was a belief that they used to have. And it's just so much easier for people to pick a belief that they're familiar with to role play, as opposed to trying to go with something that was told to them.
Speaking of spouse, like, since getting really good at this SE stuff, have you noticed that whenever you have conversations with the wife, that you start using it?
It's not just with my spouse, honestly. It's with
with everybody.
Everybody, the person at the store. I do it with myself too. Like I find myself asking questions and being more skeptical and being charitable when somebody makes a claim, because they might be right, but how do they know that they're right? So this thing has invaded my whole worldview. Quite honestly,
what I find interesting is I'll be having like even a simple conversation like who's going to do dishes or something, and I'll start in like what percentage would you say that you're confident that you actually you were the last one to do the dishes?
There you go.
And the wife would just kind of like get her head cocked, because she knows my fascination with everything that you're doing, the Street Epistemology, all of it. And anybody that's listening that isn't familiar, I'd really encourage you guys to check it out. You're going to get sucked in, just like Anthony's talking about. But anyway.
It sucks you in,
yeah. But I'll be talking to her, and she'll just kind of give me the face like, I know what you're doing, Robert. Stop it. You're doing the damn dishes.
My goal really is to get to the point where the people around me, they're so used to me doing it that they pick it up and they just want to do it themselves. So before they even ask me a question, they may have already gone through the scenario of what that might play out if I were to be engaging with them. Like that's a big part of SE, is that is to try to impart these tools to people so that they use them on their own.
I was wanting to talk about a clip that you titled "Weighing the Soul." And you're talking to this young lady about whether souls exist. What she brings up, and the reason that she believes souls exist, is something that I run into all the time. I guess I should just play it and then talk about my problem with this argument in particular and why I loved your response.
Sounds good.
How do you know that you actually have a soul?
I don't. Well, I don't personally know for sure if I have a soul or not, but through my beliefs in Eastern philosophy, the soul is kind of labeled as an energy source, but with consciousness. Okay. And this soul is supposed to weigh 7 pounds, this thing that gives us consciousness, that governs our decisions. And that has been proven by a scientist who had a sick friend who was on their deathbed, and he asked to have their bed on a scale before they died. I think this was in Germany. This person died, and the scale went up 7 pounds immediately. Yeah, so that was one study that kind of intrigued me on, like, the gravitational force of actually having a soul, like what that might entail.
Can we talk about a little bit about that soul? That's really interesting. Do you think 8-pound babies have 7-pound souls?
That's a good question. That's a good question. Perhaps. Yeah, that's a really good question.
Okay, so right away, that answers so much better than what I usually give, because I always go, not just with the soul thing, of course, but I mean with most anything that I know immediately when they say it, I'm like, oh, that's been proven wrong. And that's what I say, because that's just my honest response. That's been proven wrong. You can Google it. And I never get a good response from that.
Providing somebody with another study that shows that was debunked or a link to Snopes is more than likely. Now, there are some people that would see that and be like, oh, okay, that was kind of a foolish thing to believe. But if you notice, she had a certain arrogant certainty to what she was saying. And presenting somebody with facts when they're so certain that they're right usually will result in what's called the backfire effect, which seems to be this phenomena where people will double down and they'll double down on what they believe and ignore what you're telling them to maintain the belief. So, yeah, trying to respond with a question seems to be one of the best ways to circumvent the defensive mechanisms that somebody might surface when they are encountering something that is telling them that they're mistaken.
It's like Socratic plus, right?
I don't know. I mean, I could have gone a little bit like this clip in itself is it's kind of like a little bit of a jab at her, but I think I could have been less charitable with my question too. I could have said, do 6-pound babies have 7-pound souls? Like I specifically chose a number to give her a little bit of breathing room in her response, so I wasn't just totally stomping on her, because I don't want to make her feel stupid. I want her to think about it, and you can hear it there, and you can watch it on the channel too. She thinks about it. She is thinking about it and saying, yeah, that's a good question.
I never thought of that either. Just as many times as that study has been reused again and again and again. I'm so tired of hearing it, but at no point have I ever asked about the baby. I never even thought to. Unless maybe the soul grows over time, but then
she very well could have said, well, no, it's proportional to the weight of the body. It's about it's an 8% of your total body mass. But no, she hadn't thought it through, and that's the beauty of these questions, is that it hopefully encourages the person to think about what they believe, how they can be so sure, and discard the belief or lower their confidence in something that they may have been certain about minutes before.
Was the Denzel one, was that one where you guys actually got to get into percentages?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've listened to this one. What stands out more about this one was that he has a very strong position on something, and as it turns out, it's well, maybe we should just play it. But
okay.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting how the topic that I thought we would be discussing would have been a complete waste of time if we had embarked on it.
It's just the scientific evidence proves it's just like any kind of drug, like the first time you watch it.
Do you value scientific evidence?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Denzel, if I can provide you or somebody that follows us closely.
Yeah.
If I discovered some scientific evidence that showed that everything that you've just described very eloquently.
Hold on, I got to stop it right there.
I think I should set this up because we're talking about porn.
Yeah, I just saw his shirt. Guys, he's wearing this shirt that says, porn. Wait, what does it say here? It says,
porn kills love.
Porn kills love.
Right. Yeah, so Denzel is walking around on a university campus. I'm doing these interviews.
Oh, perfect.
He's got this bright red shirt, and it says porn kills love on it. So I was like, oh, wow, that's an interesting non-religious topic that we can talk about. But as you'll find out, by asking a very direct question, we end up saving a lot of time.
But this is hilarious.
This one's awesome. He's walking around with a shirt that says porn kills love. And rather than embark on this big, long dialogue about pornography, I want to see why he actually thinks that it's harmful.
Porn kills
and I ask him a
love.
really good question, and it helps redirect the conversation in the right direction, I think.
It's just the scientific evidence proves it's just like any kind of drug, the first time you watch it.
Do you value scientific evidence?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Denzel, if I can provide you or somebody that follows us closely.
Yeah.
If I discovered some scientific evidence that showed that everything that you've just described very eloquently, it doesn't work in that way. They've interviewed 10,000 porn stars and 100,000 men and women, and the overall result suggests that it's a positive. All right? People feel better about themselves. They're living longer. Marriages are actually prospering. Crime is going down, like across the board. And I don't even know if that could even be measured. But if it could, if there was a reliable study that showed something completely different than what you're outlining just now, would you change your mind on it?
No, I wouldn't, because at the end of the day, I do value scientific evidence, historical evidence, and that kind of stuff. But at the heart of it, I'm a Christian, so I live by a set of principles.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm a Christian, so I live by a set of principles.
So him walking around with a shirt saying porn kills love, even if he discovered evidence to show that pornography was not harmful, he would still hold his view that it was because of his religious perspectives. So I love this example because it shows how we saved so much time. We could have argued about pornography, and I could have showed him how here's some studies that show that it's beneficial. he wouldn't be open to changing his mind. There's a deeper belief propping up his position on this view.
Even if it's something that you feel confident that you could show, A, B, or C with, you don't necessarily argue A, B, or C. You present A, B, or C in a hypothetical. That way, you're avoiding the argument stage altogether. You just skip right past the arguing. Like in this scenario, is porn beneficial or not? Well, let's not even talk about that. But let's just talk about if I could show that it wasn't. Let's talk about you.
It's such a time saver. It's such a time saver. It saves my time and his, and we can really focus on why he's holding that position. As now, sometimes people come back and say, you know what? Yeah, if I were to see a study and it was reliable, I probably would change my view on pornography. And then you can start asking questions to see if they really mean it, and specifically what evidence would they accept. Sometimes people will say that they will accept evidence, but they will construct the standards to such a high degree that they're intentionally walling themselves off to protect their belief. But no, in this case with Denzel, it seemed like, no, he was really basing it on his Christian worldview. So at that point in the conversation, I would drop the porn thing completely, and I would go to why he thinks his God is real and how he could be so sure.
This reminds me of a conversation I had with Kent Hovind on the podcast. And
yes. I'm glad you brought that up.
It was by your recommendation. And just so anyone knows, if I'm about to debate you, I call Anthony Magnabosco first. So be careful, folks. But anyway, it was by your recommendation. I asked him, if evolution could be proven to you to be true, would that challenge your belief in the Bible? And we went through so many stages of having to explain this is just a hypothetical question.
Yeah.
And he had to keep rephrasing each thing. Well, what do you mean by evolution? Well, what do you mean by true? Well, what do you mean by that? And I want to say it went through about 6 different cycles where I finally said,
he was so cautious.
Yes. And I think that's the power of thinking in abstract, is as much as people will get defensive about a belief that they're actually not. This is my opinion. Maybe I could be wrong, but I don't think they're as confident in it as they project. I think that they're actually very, very intimidated by any questions about it, because if you really believe something, you don't get that defensive. You go, yeah, come at me, bro, whatever,
Good point.
And I think that possibly, maybe, yeah, but I think deep down they're actually very scared that you're going to affect their belief, or maybe, especially someone like Kent's personality, perhaps he's just worried that I'm going to get him in some little audio clip where I trip him up and then play that clip over and over.
Yeah, that's true. And yet he did respond to you finally. He finally went along with your scenario and answered it. And I think he said, yeah, if evolution, I thought I was a little surprised that he agreed to saying if evolution can be shown to be true, then it would definitely affect his faith. It would affect his belief, I think is what he said.
First he said it would definitely challenge his belief in the Bible, or whether or not the Bible's true. And then I took it a step further and said, would that challenge your belief in God? Or I think I said it back to him. Are you saying it would challenge your belief in God? And he confirmed yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that
which sometimes you'll get.
Mind.
That does throw some people that are like, oh, I wasn't expecting him to agree to that. What the next question I think should be is, okay, great. I appreciate your honesty. Have you ever thought about what evidence you would accept? What would you accept to change your mind?
See, now I feel like we're role playing. I'm going to play Kent here. But Anthony, the evidence that I would accept, and just to save time, because he would then say, well, I want to see you have a lung of a bird and the lung of a human inside your body at the same time.
That's a very good point. Somebody just like with Denzel, somebody may construct a very high standard of what they would accept. And then you need to start getting into, well, what constitutes sufficient evidence? Is there any reason why you seem to be setting a very high bar for a standard to disprove your belief, but you seem to have a lower bar with regards to what you'll accept? You can start discussing if they're making exceptions to protect their belief.
Whoa. That is such a great
there's
point.
A lot of the conversation's not dead when somebody says, oh yeah, I'd change my mind if I saw evidence. More than likely, they probably won't. And or they'll find ways to set the standard so high for the evidence that would change their mind that it becomes suspicious that they really are open to it.
I run into that all the time. That's a great. So the next question then, if I'm reiterating this properly, the next question is: do you have the same level of evidence, the same standard for what causes you to believe this thing as you do for what would cause you to disbelieve it?
That's a good one. Or more specifically, you're very quick to explain what you accept to be confident that evolution is not true. Can you give me a similar number of examples that would show that you would accept to show that your belief is not true? And it's interesting how people have a very difficult time of explaining what they would accept to defeat their position. And that's where I would go next with him.
But what about where this is one I get a lot, where I'll say, okay, so what would change your mind that Russia had influence on Trump, for example, okay? And their response is, well, if things weren't the way they are. You know what I mean? That response of, or
something really vague.
Right, like if, well, not just vague, but more or less, okay, so why do you believe that Hillary has like a secret pizza store that molests children, for example? Okay, we'll just use that one. And they say, well, I believe it because I had heard about how he had pictures on the wall of kids at this pizza place.
Okay, that's a good, can we just stop there? Because that's good. Okay, so a good question would be, if you were to discover another article that contradicted that claim, would you be equally open to accepting it? And if they say no, then you need to discuss why they're holding these articles to different standards. Perhaps it's the source. Perhaps it's the friend that happened to refer it to them, or something else going on. In addition to seeing the story, they happen to catch a news article about something completely different that prepared them for being more open to accepting the initial claim. So what you're basically discussing is the methodology that they're using to conclude that these things are true. It's not so much getting into the nitty-gritty and providing people with evidence or providing Kent with information to show that the earth is really old. Don't waste your time. Go where they take you. See what they're open to. See what they'll accept. If Kent were to specifically say, well, if it could be adequately explained to my satisfaction how a hat can become fossilized, or at least appear to be fossilized, and give me the impression that the earth is only 6,000 years old, yeah, I might be open to that. Then at that point, you need that if he's certain that he would accept that, go that way and work with him to give him the evidence. But you need to make sure that he would hold himself to that standard and lower his confidence. Like, I would get buy-in. I would say, okay, if you were to see that, how far of a drop in your confidence are we talking about here? Would you drop from a 100% certainty to a 99, or would this bring you down to a 5? So talk about the evidence, talk about what it would take to change their mind, and talk about the impact that the evidence would have on the belief before you even spend any time throwing stuff at them.
What about the rebuttal where, okay, back to the Hillary pizza thing, for example, when you say, okay, the reason you believe this is because of you've been told that there are pictures of kids on the wall, for example, so it's a secret pedophile organization or something. Mm-hmm. What would change your mind about that? And they respond, well, if there wasn't pictures of kids on the wall, that would change my mind. So now they're taking something that they kind of feel like they've already established, and they're using that thing that they established.
When you walk into an establishment and you see pictures of kids on the wall, do you immediately think that it's a pedophile ring? Like, what is your criteria? How many pictures on the wall does it take for you to be confident that it's a pedophile ring? Is it 5? Is it 10? What if there's a mixture of pictures? What if you walk into a daycare center and there's pictures of kids on the wall? Are you equally as suspicious?
Fascinating. Yeah, I see what you're saying. At every step of the way, my initial urge to discredit the last point they made, that's what's the ineffective part. Because what you're doing is you're resisting that initial urge. And since you've been doing this so long, it's probably natural for you at this point, but it sounds so unnatural to the rest of us. You're resisting that initial urge to say, you're wrong about that. No, you're wrong about that. No, you're wrong about that. You're just skipping through it and you're saying, why do you think that thing?
Yes. Okay. So yes, exactly. So I think you have to say, okay, I'm going to accept what this person is telling me is potentially true, but I'm going to question them. So whenever I hear something as ridiculous as it sounds, I'm going to entertain the possibility that it's true. Once you do that, it's a lot easier to start forming questions to verify that they used a reliable method to conclude that it's true. And I'm just in the process now of writing I've written it. There's a blog post on how to remain calm and stay on track when you're using street epistemology. because it's so hard. One of the biggest barriers to doing street epistemology is our own impatience with credulity. And coming to grips with it and giving people the benefit of the doubt helps them. It helps you form better questions, and it helps you challenge the beliefs that they hold. And that's really the big goal here, is to challenge the conclusions that people have arrived at. And our own anger, our own biases are huge roadblocks that can get in the way of a great SE talk, but they're things that we have the ability to control. It's one of the few variables in a conversation that you do have some control over. And if you can come to grips with it, you can really succeed at this method, I think.
I don't know if you've ever been in the Menger Hotel downtown.
Yeah.
Yeah, so supposedly there's a ghost down there. Went there with a couple.
Hold on, I just gotta stop it for this video. And I know that you're just to clarify, I know your point in these videos is not to mock the person in any way. You're actually trying to discuss the idea of it. I bring this up because this is so typical of what anyone that has conversations with someone that believes something strongly based on bad evidence, they see this persona, they see this body language. And body language, I'm sure, is a very important part of SE, but this guy, he's got his arms crossed and he looks so confident, because he's just looking at you. I'm sure you're familiar with this haunted house. Come on, but, and it just, when I see that, I don't know how you keep a straight face through these things.
Well, some of that is good to see because it kind of validates my efforts to make the person comfortable. I want him to feel comfortable in front of me and open and feeling that he can share these deeply held beliefs with a complete stranger. So I kind of like to see when somebody expresses a certain degree of confidence, because it tells me, and I might be way off here, but I kind of get the impression that they're probably comfortable discussing the topic with me when I see that.
What a different take. Once again, just like how we were talking about, you resist that initial urge to criticize the last point someone made, and you go for why they believe that point to be true. In this same sense, here's another example which kind of has a similar theme, where I see something and I say, look at this arrogance. This guy's acting so cocky, and it puts a burr under my saddle, As Anthony and I are both Texan, everybody, so that's a common expression where we come from. But anyway, but you see that and you go, oh, I appreciate that this person's being that honest with me, that we can really get to the topic at hand without, sneakiness.
Well, when I have a confident, comfortable interlocutor and they're being honest, that, we're talking about all these barriers, all these variables that can get in the way of a good conversation. A dishonest, guarded interlocutor can be problematic. And I like it when people are confident and they're willing to discuss these things. So, yeah, I see that as a positive.
Okay, I'm just going to play where we left off. But he was talking about a haunted hotel.
Buddies one time, we were just like, oh, yeah, let's go to the Menger. It's haunted. It was one weeknight. We weren't doing anything. I was like, okay, yeah. So we went down there, and I've heard that ghosts can manipulate like space-time in like small little pockets. And we were walking down this one hallway in the Menger, and it just felt like we were walking down the hallway for like a good 30, 45 minutes. But we were only there for like 5 minutes.
Do you think that do you agree that there are some people that might go to the Menger Hotel and not have any conception that it might be haunted?
Yeah. People that are from out of town and haven't heard of it, probably.
Do you think that people who have heard that the hotel is haunted might have more or less experiences with ghosts than people who have never heard that it was haunted?
I mean, it could be either way. So like people that have heard it's haunted, I mean, I don't really think that hearing that a place is haunted really like affects how many supernatural paranormal experiences you've had.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is, if a person is aware of this idea of ghosts and might be under the impression that there are ghosts in a place, whether it's a hotel or a school or some sort of building, are they possibly more primed to have an experience with a ghost than somebody who's never heard of the concept?
Okay, so so what you're saying is they're more likely to believe that something that happens while they're there is a ghost. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that definitely is something. Like if I'd never heard that a place was haunted, and I was walking through it, and suddenly a door just opened, or like a door shut or something, I'd just be like, oh, it was just a cleaning lady, just the wind, whatever. But if I knew that there was ghosts there, then yeah, I would be like, yeah, it was a ghost.
Okay. Is it fair to say that you might look back on your life and conclude that these experiences that you had were not ghosts if you weren't already told about ghosts?
Probably. Like, I mean, there's always a scientific explanation for everything. So yeah, like if I had no knowledge of any of those places being haunted, I would say, yeah, no, there's no such thing as ghosts.
Well, thank you so very much for your time.
Yeah, of course.
It's interesting how he mentioned the importance of scientific rigor and data, but he seems so quick to conclude that there was some sort of spirit as the explanation for his experience. And it seemed like he kind of came around on it, that yeah, I guess if I hadn't already been told about ghosts, I might not be concluding that these experiences were caused by ghosts. And I didn't just tell him. I asked him questions, and he was able to kind of come around and agree to that on his own.
In my experience, whenever I ask someone a lot of questions that help direct them to questioning their beliefs, they'll respond in a very similar way that he responded. As soon as he said it, I went, like, oh my God, I hear that all the time, is they'll respond by going, so you're saying blah, 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 blah. It's almost like what they're thinking, what they really want to say, and this is putting my words in their mouth, of course, but what they really want to say is, I get that you're leading me this direction, and I would not have listened to you otherwise, but now, since you're forcing me to think about what you really mean, I can honestly say, I recognize that this is what you would be saying if you weren't asking questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I finally have dropped my filter that would have stopped you from getting a point across. If you would have just come out and said, ghosts are bullshit,
ghosts are
bro.
made up. Yeah, ghosts are made up. They're bullshit.
They wouldn't have received it. But since you made me drop my filter, I think what you're trying to say is this, and this.
Yeah, if you can help people be comfortable and explain what they believe and repeat it back and ask them a couple of questions, most of the time people, they back off on their certainty. They back off on their confidence that something is true. And some people go out to find better reasons to hold a belief, and some people just lower their confidence and never raise it back up.
The other thing that I liked in the last video before this one that we have played, you avoided talking about all this other stuff and you went right to why do you think the way that you think, right? Whereas this one, you said you're making this very bold claim and almost acting confident in a way like, of course you know what I'm talking about. That kind of thing. So you saw that and said, let's talk about other people. And then once he said he was comfortable acknowledging that other people would be reasonable to respond in a certain way, then you brought it back and said, okay, now let's talk about you. Do you follow the same law that you would apply to these other people? Forcing this intellectual honesty almost. So it's neat that these two clips in contrast show when sometimes it's appropriate to avoid the world and go right to the heart of the matter, and then sometimes it's more appropriate to say, let's look at this in a way that you would accept in an honest way by looking at everything else, and then can you apply that same honesty to yourself?
Yeah, usually these clips, the longer ones and even the shorter ones, they tend to have a takeaway. And I think in this one, it was that we all have biases. That we all have these cognitive biases and maybe even a propensity to believe certain things. If this happened in Ireland, would a person be more apt to think that it was a leprechaun as opposed to a ghost? Could also be a good question. I've asked that question for ghost claims. So yeah, these are really interesting discussions, and they usually end on very good terms too. Like this guy Anthony, was not upset with me, I don't think, about me challenging his ghost view, and I think he ended up walking away with a better understanding of his beliefs. So that's really what I love about this essay approach, is that it allows you to challenge people but not be a dick about it. And you can still be friends usually after the fact.
It's funny you bring that up. That is actually a question I wanted to ask you in particular. I had it written down here. Do you find, just on a personal note, do you find that you have a lot of friends that you've developed that believe things differently than you do, but because, the friendship was actually initiated through some form of SE?
That's interesting. I wouldn't call them friendships, but maybe associations. So I see a lot of these individuals on the trail again and again and again. And it's really interesting. Very often people will wave at me or smile, or if I'm not talking to somebody, they will chat with me a little bit before going on their hike. And maybe we pick up the conversation and have a second talk about ghosts or something like that. But it's almost like we have sort of an appreciation for our differences. And it seems like they've enjoyed the talk, and many of them are eager to pick it up. So, yeah, maybe there's just more of a respect for our differences might be the answer there.
You know what it is? I bet you, but I bet I know what it is. You've been through something together, in the same way that you could have just a cab ride with some complete stranger.
There might be something to that. Like, I think that we do have these special. It's like a special moment. Mm-hmm. And I don't upload every video, and a lot of the ones that I don't upload are still just as profound as the ones that I do. And the conversations stick with people. I'll run to people 2 years later, and they'll spot me, and they seem to remember exactly what we talked about. These conversations tend to resonate and stay with people.
Here's another thing, and I get an odd satisfaction from this, and I wonder if you do as well, is whenever you're talking to someone and they get really excited about their belief, and this one might not be, might not apply to like a ghost scenario like the last one we were discussing, but whenever you're talking to someone, I get this with a lot of fundamental Christians, and especially if they come from more of an evangelical background, they finally recognize that they have someone that will listen instead of just argue back and forth, or it's either I agree with you and we have nothing to talk about because we agree, we go to the same church, or I disagree with you and we just argue. But they run into someone that says, I'm not going to interrupt you, I'm going to listen to you, and they feel so free, and they really get into it, and you see like almost like a passion for what they believe in, and I love it. I really love it. They'll get off and they'll be like, oh, sorry, I was preaching at you for a minute, and I'm just smiling. I'm like, no, go ahead, man. Mm-hmm. I love seeing somebody talk about something that they really care about.
I get that a lot, where people, they say that they really enjoyed the talk, and it was so nice to have somebody just listen to them and not project any condemnation or any ridicule, that it was just so nice to be able to speak freely and have somebody question what they're saying and try to understand them better. That's one of the great things about these questions, is that you have to pay very close attention to formulate a good question. And the act of paying attention helps people feel more comfortable. They'll disclose more information to you, and you can really form a great question if you pay attention. And people love being listened to, and they love talking about these beliefs. They're very tied to a person's identity, many of these beliefs. And it's kind of rare these days when somebody is asked a question and they take 30 seconds to think about it, and you're not stepping on that silence. There was a little bit of a pause there in one of those talks. I think it was maybe with Anthony with a ghost. But when you can give somebody a really long pause and give them time to think about the answer that they're whipping up in their mind, people tend to really like that. That's rare. You don't usually see that. We step on those pauses all the time.
Awesome. Yes, I was wanting to get to the pause again, because we had talked about it last time you were on the show, and it's so true. It's like in that moment, I love how you say that. Don't step on it, because in that moment, the gears are finally turning. Just shut up and let it work. Like, you already did your job. Just be quiet. Let them think for a second. That's so true.
Yeah. It's tough though when you have two people or more. I was interviewing a Mormon couple more than a month ago. And it was unfortunate because I know if I had a one-on-one with either of them, the discussion would have been far more productive. But what would happen is I would ask the woman a good question, and she was thinking about it like a spider moment, looking up, at the ceiling. Mm-hmm. It was outdoors, but she was looking up at the sky thinking. And her husband took that as an opportunity for him to give an answer or ask for clarification, and it just stepped all over her thinking. And she was even getting frustrated with him, like, hold on a second, I'm thinking about the answer. It's tougher when you have more than one person to have those pauses. There have been times where I think, I'm never doing a dual interview again. This has to just be a one-on-one thing. But I think that there are some advantages to doing the dual or more approach too. But yeah, stepping on those pauses is very common when you're interviewing more than one person.
I would think especially if it was a spouse too, because that group psychology effect that happens regardless of the relationship. If two people believe the same thing, they're going to support each other. But especially in like if they're in a close relationship scenario, then they almost, I would think, would feel it's their responsibility to do for that person what they would do for themselves if they could. So whenever you ask me a challenging question, for example, my mind doesn't want to change. So I am almost being defensive in a way of protecting my beliefs. But if you catch me in a moment where I start to change my beliefs, I am kind of delaying that feeling of cognitive dissonance for a moment, just enough to think about it. But if I've got somebody next to me that also thinks the same thing, then they're going to almost feel, probably on a subconscious level perhaps, so they might not be aware of it rather, but that they're going to say, oh, I need to help them out, and jump in before I say, oh, that might be true.
And if that partner offers an answer, the person who is going to be spending 30 seconds thinking about it is probably going to stop thinking about it. And now they're considering the answer that their partner gave rather than the answer that they would have gave.
Okay, so Anthony, I wanted to ask you something. And this is a belief that I've held on to for a long time. I think psychedelics or any kind of mind-altering drugs affect how we feel about our own reality, in the sense of not just that, if you're on drugs, then obviously you're experiencing reality differently. I don't mean in that sense. I mean more like, if I have experienced drugs that have altered my reality in the past, then I would be more open to changing my mind about some challenge that you might bring to me through SE or any kind of discussion. So I say that to kind of ask, do you think that someone that might have had a mind-altering effect in the past, that they might be more open to changing their mind now?
That's a good question. Well, I've never taken any mind-altering drugs. I mean, I'd like to give it a try, but I haven't, other than perhaps alcohol. So I don't really know what that experience is like. I'm wondering, though, maybe if a person who's more open to taking drugs might be more open to looking at their beliefs. So there might be more of a correlation there, as opposed to because a person took those things, those drugs, that later on they're more open to a conversation. It's probably more of a personality trait than anything else. But I don't know.
Like it's already there. It's already.
It may
there
just be there. It may just be
there.
Like, yeah, a person who may be more open to taking a psychedelic might be more open to agreeing to have a talk with a person on camera who's a stranger in the woods. And that person then might have more of a tendency to be more open to thinking about their beliefs. So, yeah, there might be some.
Did you just SE me right on my own damn show?
I don't know, did we?
But yeah, I've always thought that, but that's a good point.
This is really one of the reasons why I try to caution people not to draw too many conclusions from my videos or others, because we may be selecting a certain type of individual. A person that's willing to participate in this conversation might be more. I hate to use the word susceptible.
Oh, wow. No, you're right. Open-minded, maybe?
Or open-minded, possibly. And that's not to say that everyone I run into is open-minded. I have my fair share of people who are very closed. But yeah, perhaps just the way that we're going about trying to engage in these conversations and record them and show examples might be including some sort of bias in them.
Speaking of that exactly, of whether or not they're open-minded, there was this one girl you were talking to named Clara. My favorite part is, and the listener won't get this unless they follow the links in the show notes. I'll put a link there so you guys can watch these videos yourself. But she has a water bottle, and Anthony just snatches it, just takes it from her to make a point.
Could you be holding a belief that makes you happy, but might not be really true?
I feel like it's true to yourself, and that's all that's really important.
Do you really live that way?
Yeah.
Do you?
I mean, as long as I feel it's true, like, why?
I'm sorry, I can't. I'm not like you, man. I can't just hold it back. It drives me crazy.
What's bothering you about it?
That whole thing. Well, I got my truth and you got your truth. Like,
that
essentially is just like the base of everything that pisses me off about.
It's infuriating, but listen, we're not going to help anybody if we jump down their throats. We need to hear what they mean by it and let them think it through, because how else are we going to break through? Me just shaking her and saying, snap out of it. This is not an issue of choice or opinion. What's a fact is a fact, and what's true is true. You have to walk people through it. You have to ask questions and help them discover it on their own.
My response to that would immediately be to ask them if holding that way of thinking is an honest way of dealing with the world. And you kind of get to that, but you don't come at it that direct. And
I think I say something like, "Do you really live that way?"
Oh yeah, you did. Yeah, you're right. But I think that's a better way of going about it than just coming right out like, that's a logical fallacy.
And I should say that what you're about to play the rest of this, it's one way of approaching this challenge of subjective truth, this relativistic view. There are a couple of other ideas that I have on the subject, and I wrote a blog post on it, but this is probably one of the most direct ways to help people break through.
Do you really live that way?
Yeah.
Do you?
I mean, as long as I feel it's true, like, why should I believe, I don't know, why shouldn't I find my truth in what I believe and that make me happy? Why shouldn't everyone do that?
I'm really thirsty right now, and you're actually holding my water bottle.
All right, he just took her water bottle.
Yeah.
It's true for me.
Okay.
That
makes you happy.
Does it make
you
it?
You stole my water bottle, so
I stole it.
I mean, it wasn't yours, it was mine. But that's
if it was true for me that it was actually mine, would it make it true?
You're probably just a little. That would make you maybe a little off.
Yeah, it'd make you a little off. No kidding.
Yeah, that was a pretty direct way of trying to break through this idea that what you prefer to believe makes it true, and it's a very dangerous mindset. And while we were laughing there, this is a really big problem, this whole idea of relativism and subjective truth. And in fact, I think it's one of these things that you have to address before you even move on to a belief. It makes no sense to have a conversation with Clara about why she also thinks that a God is real if she thinks everyone who believes in any type of God or believes that there is no God is true. Like, that is a true belief, regardless of their view on it. So you have to address this idea of relativism first before you move on. It's a really big hurdle.
Yeah, I wanted to pick your brain about something. It was Jeff Sessions that, and in fact, this was my first episode. I was trying to think, what should I start with? And it was the one where I had interviewed Aaron Ra. I played some clips of Jeff Sessions talking about how relativism is such a dangerous thing. My response to the typical believer talking about relativism, if they're kind of like the divine command theory sort of believer, where they say we get our truth from God, we get logic from God, we get right from wrong from God, and if you don't believe in God, then you just believe in relativism. They make up this false dichotomy between them and everyone else, kind of thing. And I've always felt like, and tell me if you would agree, that if you're getting your beliefs from a deity, or you're saying that all creation is from this deity, or all truth comes from this deity, or right and wrong and morality itself comes from this deity, then isn't that a form of relativism in itself? Because that would mean that right and wrong is arbitrary based on one person's subjective opinions, which would be the deity. So to me, it's almost like saying, let's say I'm the Christian and you, Anthony, are the atheist, and I'm saying, look, you are getting your truth from subjectivism, and I'm getting my truth from God. But what I'm really admitting to is I'm also getting my truth from subjectivism. God's the subject rather than saying I'm the subject.
I think so. Yeah, this is the one thing that I think very fundamental religious people and atheists have in common. Most atheists, I think, view truth as objective, and you have your fundamentalists that also view it as objective. So if you've been ever looking for common ground between the two to get a conversation started, you probably agree that truth is objective. Now, where that objective truth comes from, I think our views on that differ wildly. I've had people say truth comes from Jesus, and then I might just ask something like, you believe that truth is coming from a belief that a person is giving it? So yeah, the source of this truth, I don't know where we're differing on that. Like, I think, yes, maybe there's some subjective quality to it, so that a person says, well, yeah, it's my God that's giving it, and somebody says, no, it's my God that's giving it. I don't know where it originates, but it does seem like truth is objective, and it is one of those things that we have in common.
Why, Gordon, do you believe that a God even exists?
Because I was brought up a Christian. I'm brought up to believe that. I mean...
How long have you had the belief?
Since I was able to think. And it gets stronger as I grow older.
Interesting.
Just to pause real quick. In this video, this man is an elderly man named Gordon, kind of a grandpa-looking guy, you know, like cool brim hat, shades, button-up shirt. You just want to give him a hug. He's rocking back and forth while you're talking to him. What does that tell you right away?
Well, I think he was a little uncomfortable, and the way that we positioned ourselves for this conversation, I don't normally do this, but he's backed up against some trees. He really can't go anywhere, so I've boxed him in, and this was not intentional. It just happened. So that is probably one reason. Maybe he's feeling a little bit trapped. I have a camera there. I'm asking him something that he's never been asked probably before. So I think he's a little bit taken aback. And also, it may not become apparent through this clip, but he's a little hard of hearing. So he might be struggling to understand what I'm saying. And I'm talking a little bit louder for that very reason. But yeah, I'm not sure. Usually when somebody's rocking back and forth, they're a little agitated. They're uncomfortable.
Are there other body languages that just come to mind right now that you would say if we identify these sorts of things, not to read into them too much, but maybe they might indicate this or that?
That would be my caution. Don't read too much into these things.
Okay.
But a neck touch is usually an indication that a person is they're protecting themselves. The neck is a very vulnerable area apparently, and if somebody touches their neck, it could be a sign that you've hit a very sensitive point in the conversation.
If they start squeezing their nipple, that's a good reason to just stop the conversation right there, though, right?
That's where you ask for their number at that point. Yeah.
Like this SE is turning me on. You know?
Yesterday, I ran into a family that had a little 4-month-old baby. And they identified themselves as Christians. But they could have easily been Hindus or Muslims or pagans.
Doesn't matter. Well, not pagans, but pagans are non-believers. But that doesn't matter what religion you come from or what your ethnicity is. As long as you believe in a supreme being, whether you call him Allah or God or Nehu or whatever, as long as you believe in the same being, it doesn't matter.
Let's say that little girl is raised to believe that there's no God.
Well, I feel sorry for her.
Would she be just as correct in her belief as you being raised with your belief?
Just as correct? No. I mean...
Why not?
Because this was all created for us, by God, and we look for eternal life. And that comes through salvation. And if you don't believe in God, then you can't have salvation.
Are you saying that if a child is raised to believe in a God, they're justified in having the belief, but if a child is raised to believe in no gods, they're not justified?
A young child has no concept of what's right or wrong at that point. They believe only what they're told. And so what they are taught in the first 5 years of life will probably be with them for the rest of their life.
Boom.
Which is unfortunate.
Wow.
What a revelation at the end. I love that one because he's basically just outlining the dangers of indoctrination without really coming out and saying it. And I don't know if it even dawned on him at that moment that he was describing more than likely his own upbringing. And the reason why he's walking around at 75 years old or however old he is with that belief is probably because he was taught it. And there were a couple of points in the conversation where he mentions things that would be raw meat to an atheist, that it would be so hard to ignore. I don't know if you caught it or not. I can go over them if you want me to.
Yeah, please do. But I'm guessing we're thinking of the same ones.
He talks about pagans, right? And he says that pagans are non-believers. Or he says, if that little girl was raised to not believe in a God, I'd feel sorry for her.
You didn't take the bait.
You want to jump in and be like, no. I have 2 kids. They're the most wonderful kids ever. And I didn't teach them about a God. You want to just explain that, no, you can have a meaningful life without a God. But you have to set aside those tendencies to want to correct people and stay focused on how they're so sure that what they believe is true.
Where I totally agree with you, not taking the bait there was very advantageous. But I find sometimes it's really effective if I force them to talk about me instead of me talking about them where they'll get defensive. Force them to talk about me like, okay, so you're saying that I should go to hell. Well, I mean, the Bible says that. Okay, so what is it that I would need to do? And they go through the Romans road, more or less. You know what I mean? Okay, so if I accept Christ my personal Savior, this will happen. How would I believe that? Since I've already, faith comes by hearing by the Word of God. I already have this information, yet I still reject it. So what would I need to do to avoid rejecting it? Well, you have to believe. Okay, so is belief something that I can make myself do? Can I make myself believe this or that? And keep walking them through them talking about me. And I found that what that leads me the opportunity to do is point out how judgmental they are, because by the time you get to about the fifth or sixth, okay, so if I don't believe, does that mean that I'm a bad person? But yeah, you just want to live in your sin. Oh, well, I don't feel that way. And you kind of direct them to where you get to a point where you go, as much as you say you shouldn't judge people, you're sounding very judgmental here. Or it gives you the opportunity to say, if I did follow these sorts of things, or if I really did try to do this, but it still isn't working the way that you say it should work for me, doesn't that show that maybe your ideas are wrong? Or maybe the Bible isn't right about its implication that we can just believe whatever we want. And I feel like having them direct everything right at me, like as if I can take all of this, but it's gonna present a lot of holes in your argument. Like sometimes that's effective. Have you ever gone that route?
I think I have. What I prefer to do these days, though, is to see if they have a friend that doesn't believe. And then we start talking about their
that's
friend
even better.
Or
yeah.
some hypothetical. Rather than putting it on me and making me the bad guy, I try to present myself as a neutral observer in this dialogue. And yeah, so you said that it was a God that helped you get through that difficult time. Do you have any friends that don't believe in any gods? Well, yeah. And if they were to encounter a difficult time, how do you think that they would manage? So we actually start talking about kind of like what you're doing, but rather than putting the focus on yourself, you're putting it on maybe a friend that they're going to see next week. And then they start asking. It's kind of a reminder also when they run into that person about the conversation. The thing that I liked about this clip with Gordon, I just wanted to weigh in really quickly, is that by not taking the bait and staying focused on questioning, it became evident that he had a double standard. It's okay to be taught something at an early age as long as you're being taught that a God exists. But if you're being taught that a God doesn't exist, well, then that's bad. And that was really the big takeaway, I think, from this conversation was the double standard that he had created.
I think I just kind of figured you out, Anthony. Right when you said that person might run in to their friend later and be reminded about this, you actually care about these people. You're not just wanting to win the argument or wanting to just change their mind because you're wanting to promote your own personal beliefs. You actually care about these people. It's obvious.
These are people who are in my community. I get all these messages all the time from people wanting to debate me or use street epistemology on me. I would much rather prefer to just have SE conversations on the people who are in my community. The woman who literally cuts my son's hair is somebody who I ran into on the trail. She's wielding scissors in front of my kid's head. Okay, this is a beneficial thing, and I do care about these people, and I want to gently challenge their views, and I also want to impart this approach of SE so that they start using it on their own. And yes, I try to come up with questions that will resonate and stay with a person. So yes, when they run into their friend, and that was the friend that they were envisioning in my hypothetical, that they might be reminded of the conversation. I want these conversations to stick with people. I want these questions to stick. And I try to come up with all different ways to make that happen, so that it's not just a one-off that was 5-10 minutes long and they never think of it again. I want these questions and that conversation to stay with them.
For anyone that would say that they care as well and wants to learn more about this, could you tell them how they could find out more and maybe even contact you?
Sure. The best way to learn about street epistemology is to go to streetepistemology.com. You'll find a link to all the different groups that are out there, all different channels where people are uploading examples. There are a tremendous amount of resources, and there's even an app. If you want to reach out to me directly, I'm accessible. If you have any criticisms or suggestions, message me on Twitter or Facebook. My Twitter is Magnabosco, my last name. And I usually respond within 24 hours to pretty much every inquiry.
Anthony was fantastic today. Learn more about this broadcast at therighttoreason.com. Music is always brought to you by aloststateofmind.com. And our last episode, Steve Hill and I were talking about David Silverman. Remember that? And how he won't talk to me. I'd pissed him off, or so I thought. But I thought wrong, everybody. Dave is coming to the Right to Reason podcast. Woo! And we're going to talk about the upcoming American Atheist Conference and who's invited and who's not. You know what I'm talking about. We're going to discuss the recent Mythicist Milwaukee debacle. David Silverman, next week. Between now and then, know that you have the right to reason.